Hi there, friends. Today we are stepping back in time to the year 1822. I sure hope you wore your walking shoes because we have a long journey ahead of us and we won't be able to call a Lyft to help us get to our journey's end. Today we are following in the footsteps of Araminta Ross as she forges the path known as the Underground Railroad. Spoiler alert, there isn't an actual train to help us make this treacherous journey. We are diving into the true life story of the legendary Araminta Ross. You may know her as Harriet Tubman. The woman had many names, in fact. She would respond to Araminta, Minty, Harriet, Moses, even Old Chariot. When you hear me say any one of these names today, keep in mind I'm always referring to Harriet Tubman. The Underground Abductor by Nathan Hale transports us back to 1822, where we begin following the harrowing life and times of Harriet Tubman. We will reach our journey's end in the year 1865. Born a slave, Araminta, or Minty, Ross, was bounced from one dangerous and back-breaking job to another, all while living under the constant threat of being sold and separated from her family. After years of surviving the cruel abuse delivered by her masters, the Broadduses, Minty escaped and traveled north to freedom. Shortly after gaining her freedom and claiming her free name as Harriet Tubman, she risked her life helping countless slaves escape to their freedom as well. Pretty incredible, right? This happened right here in America, in fact. Harriet's journey spanned across half of this country, across the Mason-Dixon line. Remember where this line is? At the borders of Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Delaware, and West Virginia. So, yes, she was crossing back and forth between slavery territory and the free states. Harriet braved the treacherous routes of the Underground Railroad to bring other slaves to freedom, becoming the most legendary abductor on the Underground Railroad. The abductor was the first person in, the front lines, if you will. Abductors ventured deep into slave territory and made first contact with those to be rescued. In the perilous world of the Underground Railroad, no job was more dangerous than that of the abductor, and Harriet, she was one of the best. The Underground Abductor is driven by three themes: courage and perseverance, challenging the status quo, and good versus evil. Minty herself encapsulates courage and perseverance. She upholds the theme of triumph of the human spirit in the face of adversity, or in her case, literal death. She endures the impossible odds of her escape to freedom with courage, sheer resolve, and true grit. On page 40 of the book, Minty flexes this courage and declares, "There are two things I have the right to: liberty or death. If I can't have one, I'll have the other." So let's take a look at the theme of challenging the status quo. Throughout the book, Minty throws all of her energy into changing her and her family's circumstances, despite her parents' objections in the name of compliance to the status quo. Minty relentlessly challenges American slavery, otherwise known as the status quo at this time. Finally, let's examine the theme of good versus evil. This classic battle between altruism and antagonism is highlighted by Minty's struggle for her and all slaves' freedom, the altruism, against society at large, antagonism. Moving on to the plot sequence of The Underground Abductor, which follows the typical literary blueprint of exposition, conflict, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. The exposition introduces Araminta Ross and her family as slaves owned by Anthony Thompson and Edward Broadus. The conflict is presented as man versus society, or in this case, woman versus society. Minty wants herself and her family to enjoy the life of freedom, but doesn't know what action to take yet. Over the years, the tension of Minty's tale increases considerably. This is known as the rising action of the story. We learn about the gruesome Nat Turner Rebellion. Minty's sister Lina is sold south. Minty married John Tubman, and then Mr. Broadus dies. Minty decides at this moment it's time to escape to freedom. Now, at the climax of Minty's journey, we follow Minty's treacherous journey north via the Underground Railroad. Minty adopts the name Harriet Tubman as her free name, and then not long after, she returns to slave territory to lead countless other slaves to freedom. The Civil War breaks out in 1861, and the pinnacle of Harriet's involvement in the Civil War came to a head at the Combahee River Raid, in which she was responsible for leading around 800 slaves to freedom. The following action to follow was what Harriet spent most of her life fighting for, the end of American slavery that came with the end of the Civil War. And never fear, there is a happy resolution to this tale. Harriet moved her family and her friends to her home in Auburn, New York, and essentially lived happily ever after. Figurative language is used to amplify stories and evoke thoughtful intrigue. The author frequently applies hyperbole, metaphor, simile, idiom, and onomatopoeia to embellish his writing in The Underground Abductor. These literary devices add depth and color to the story while simultaneously affording us, the readers, opportunities to comprehend this information in alternative and thoughtful ways, as opposed to that typical black and white delivery of information that really only allows for a single perspective. For instance, the quote, "This place is crawling with patty rollers." Rather than saying this place has a lot of patty rollers, using the word crawling kind of arouses this sense of like bugs crawling on you or something similar, which creates a deeper, more visceral reading experience. Onomatopoeia specifically is when a word actually mimics the sound of the object or action it refers to when it's spoken. This language device appeals to our sense of hearing. Do you feel that onomatopoeia brings the story to life? Can you hear the sounds of these words? Chew, whap, squawk, bawk, bawk, crunch, whack. What do you think? As a visual medium, the book effortlessly depicts visual symbolism. The author repeatedly employs biblical allegory, drawing upon Harriet's personal accounts of visions she had. The author also leans on metaphorical symbolism to deliver visual representations of slavery. For instance, when Minty comes across a trapped muskrat, she poignantly remarks, "You're trapped just like me, ain't you?" Or Minty's vision of her escape to freedom, depicted as breaking the chain attached to her ankle. Even the cover of the book is illustrated with Harriet holding a lantern in the dark, a symbol representative of her leading her people out of the dark and toward the light. Keep in mind, symbolism is wildly left up to interpretation, so I encourage you to draw your own conclusions of the meaning of all these illustrations. The author combines informal and colloquial diction with declarative and exclamatory syntax to compose his account of Harriet Tubman's life. By maintaining casual diction and utilizing everyday speech of the time, makes the story more realistic and relatable. Declarative syntax is utilized by both the narrator and the characters of the story. The narrator specifically uses it as a means to inform us of information not detailed in the character's dialogue. Exclamatory syntax evokes strong feelings and inspires us to feel the energy and excitement the character is feeling. For instance, when Minty steps foot on free land, she exclaims, "Glory over everything! The sun is like gold through the trees." Do you feel the same excitement that Harriet must have felt? The author combines the literary devices we've discussed so far to flesh out his descriptive and narrative writing style. A narrative writing style is indicated by storytelling details such as characters, conflict, settings. These details we covered when examining the novel's plot sequence, remember? Often found in fiction, descriptive writing paints a picture with words. Rather than trying to convince the reader of anything, the author only describes things as they are, perfect for historic accounts and historical fiction. It's essential we recognize how the author shapes the graphics and artwork, and how that gives deeper meaning to the storytelling. Otherwise, we'll miss critical elements in the story. For instance, the panels, frames, and gutters all indicate how to proceed in the story. Like these graphic devices, the foreground, midground, and background of each panel are also thoughtfully drawn to help indicate movement in the story, and also significant moments and characters. Captions, speech balloons, special lettering, these also denote meaningful information. Speech balloons help us determine who's speaking in the panel and recognize the difference between external and internal dialogue. Special lettering and shaped speech balloons also indicate specific speech devices such as whispering and singing. As an added bonus, the hangman, remember that character? He's unrelated to the story, but he interacts with the narrator. He pops up and indicates what the special lettering and shapes indicate. For instance, when Minty's speech bubble is wiggly and the font is noticeably goofy with different sized fonts, he pops up and rids us of confusion and says, "Hey, it sounds like she's singing." Do you feel like the hangman usually shows up to address your questions and thoughts as you read the book? I know I sure do. Before we move on, let me give you a pro graphic novel reader tip. Pay attention to the faces, hands, and feet of the characters as they are extremely expressive and help us understand what's happening in the story and how the characters are feeling. Let's talk teacher shot. The readability and suitability of any given book don't always have to agree with one another. However, I maintain they do in the case of The Underground Abductor. Scholastic rates the readability of the novel for grades 5 through 9, and Reading Rockets rates it for ages 9 through 12. These determined readability scores coincide with the official Lexile measurement of GN 370L. Considering the TEKS and the course content for social studies classes for 4th through 8th grade, I believe The Underground Abductor is an appropriate addition to my future late elementary or middle school social studies classroom library. Activity time! Woohoo! Let's warm up our noggins and have some fun. Rather than asking you guys to simply write a summary over what we've learned from The Underground Abductor, boring, I've come up with a few activities to really flex our smarts and give us an excuse to put on our critical thinking caps. Our first activity is called Decode Minty's Spirituals. I'm sure you all noticed Minty's singing throughout the book. Well, these weren't any old songs, but they were spirituals carrying hidden meanings. Let's chart, evaluate, and decode the hidden messages of Minty's spirituals, and afterwards, we're going to listen to actual recordings of these spirituals being sung. Next, I've come up with an activity I've named hashtag All Aboard the Underground. Let's imagine if social media existed at the time of the Underground Railroad, and let's pretend that slaves at the time could read and write. Do you guys think it would be beneficial? Would it be harmful? How? We're going to break out into groups and brainstorm helpful hashtags slaves could have posted safely, drawing on the events and terminology we've learned from the Underground Abductor. Last but not least fun, I challenge you guys to the familiar game of Would You Rather, but the history edition. For homework, I would like you to mull over two questions. Would you rather be a free black person helping slaves escape to freedom on the Underground Railroad? Or would you rather be a white person assisting slaves on the Underground Railroad, deeming your home a train station? I want you guys to really take your time and weigh both options, using your critical thinking caps as you reflect on Harriet Tubman's harrowing life story. Then explain why you chose one or the other. Thank you so very much for your time and attention, friends. Be sure to check out Nathan Hale's entire collection of hazardous tales for additional historical graphic novel fun. I'm leaving you with this quote from Harriet Tubman herself. Every great dream begins with a dreamer. Always remember, you have within you the strength, the patience, and the passion to reach for the stars to change the world. Have a beautiful day, everyone, and reach for the stars. Each of you is capable of anything and everything you set your mind to.